She was just an invisible maid in a luxury hotel. He was a lonely millionaire who watched everything, a little too closely. What began as a whisper turned into a game between power and vulnerability. If you enjoy love and romance stories, watch until the end, subscribe to this channel and leave a comment saying where you're listening from. On the 7th floor of a hotel that rose like a mausoleum of luxury before a perpetually grey sea, Clara moved with silent steps, pushing her cleaning trolley as though she were pushing her own past forward, trying to distance herself from it one room at a time. She was 23 years old, with eyes that avoided mirrors and hands calloused not just by labor, but by guilt. The guilt she carried had a name and a date. Isabel, her younger sister, dead in an accident for which Clara considered herself the true murderer, even though no one had ever said so aloud. Since that night 18 months ago, she had exiled herself from the world and from herself, abandoning her English literature degree at the University of Brighton, the poems she used to write hidden in the corners of notebook pages, and the dreams of being read by someone who might understand her. Now her life was marked by the repetition of gestures, by the predictability of rooms, by the ritual of folding other people's sheets and hiding her femininity beneath a loose uniform and an old lace bra. Her mother's inheritance. That bra was all that remained of her memories before everything shattered. Her mother had died of cancer when Clara was 17, leaving behind little except debts and that single piece of delicate underwear, cream-colored with tiny flowers embroidered along the edges. It had been expensive once, a small luxury her mother had saved for. It pinched Clara's ribs now, the underwire digging into her skin with every breath, but she wore it every day beneath her shapeless uniform. It restricted, held everything in place, kept her body from being seen, from being noticed, from being desired. And that was exactly what she wanted. To be invisible. To fade into the beige walls and grey corridors of the Sovereign Hotel until she disappeared entirely. The hotel where she worked stood on the Brighton seafront, a monument to wealth and discretion. It was the kind of place where celebrities checked in under false names, where businessmen made deals that would never appear in the newspapers, where marriages crumbled behind soundproof doors and new alliances were formed in bars, where a single cocktail cost more than Clara earned in a day. The Sovereign was all polished marble and understated luxury, the sort of establishment that didn't need to announce its exclusivity because everyone who mattered already knew. Clara had learned to read the debris of other people's lives in the 16 months she'd worked there. A champagne glass with lipstick marks that didn't match the color the wife wore at breakfast. Sheets that smelled of expensive perfume and desperation, the scent of affairs conducted with passionate urgency and immediate regret. Suitcases packed in a hurry, as though someone had fled in the middle of the night, leaving behind a single shoe or a forgotten bracelet. Love letters torn into pieces and stuffed in wastepaper bins. Pregnancy tests, both positive and negative, wrapped in tissues and hidden at the bottom of bathroom bins. Credit cards cut in half. Wedding rings left on nightstands like abandoned promises. She cleaned it all without judging, without feeling, without thinking. Or at least that's what she told herself. The truth was that she felt everything, noticed everything, absorbed every fragment of sadness and joy and rage and passion that hung in those rooms like invisible dust. She had always been too sensitive, too attuned to other people's emotions. It had made her a good writer once, before Isabel died, and she could no longer bear to put words on paper because every sentence felt like a betrayal of her sister's silence. That Tuesday morning in late October, the grey sky pressed against the windows as though trying to smother the city. Rain threatened but never quite arrived, leaving everything suspended in that peculiarly English state of damp anticipation. Clara was finishing room 712 when Maggie, the head housekeeper, appeared in the doorway with her usual expression of perpetual disapproval. Maggie was in her late 50s, rail-thin with grey hair pulled back so tightly it seemed to stretch her face. She ran the housekeeping department with military precision and had little patience for emotional displays or mistakes. "Clara, I need you to cover the penthouse floor today. Sienna called in sick." Clara's hands froze on the towel she was folding. "The penthouse?" "Yes, top floor. Just one suite, but it's our most particular guest." Maggie's voice dropped slightly as though speaking about something sacred or forbidden. "Mr. Calderon. He's been here for 8 months now. Very specific requirements. I'll give you the list. And Clara, this is important. You need to follow the instructions exactly. Mr. Calderon values his privacy and his routines. Any deviation, and you'll be off that floor permanently. Understood? Clara had heard whispers about the penthouse guest. The maids who usually serviced that floor, Sienna and occasionally Roz, spoke about him in hushed tones during breaks, as though he were a ghost or a god or something in between. He never complained, never asked for anything unreasonable, but his presence unsettled them in ways they couldn't quite articulate. He rarely left the suite. When he did, it was at odd hours, 3 in the morning or dawn when the corridors were empty. He received no visitors. He had meals delivered 3 times a day, but often left them untouched outside his door, the food congealing on expensive plates. Some said he was hiding from someone powerful. Others said he was dying of some rare disease and had come to Brighton to watch the sea in his final months. A few claimed he was conducting some sort of secret experiment, something to do with computers and surveillance, though no one knew for certain. What kind of requirements? Clara asked, though part of her wanted to refuse. To stay in her familiar 7th floor, where she could predict every moment of her day and lose herself in the rhythm of cleaning, without having to think or feel or interact with anyone beyond brief. Professional exchanges. Nothing strange, just very precise. He wants the room cleaned at exactly 2 in the afternoon. Not before, not after. He leaves a note each day with specific instructions for what needs attention. Don't move anything on his desk. Don't touch any of the electronics. Use only unscented cleaning products, no fragrances whatsoever. Don't open the curtains unless he's specifically requested it in the note. And most importantly, do not attempt to engage him in conversation if you encounter him. He values his privacy above all else. A few months ago, Roz tried to ask him if he needed extra towels and he didn't respond at all, just looked at her as though she were speaking a foreign language. Sienna says he's like a ghost, barely there even when you can see him. Clara nodded slowly. Privacy. She understood that better than anyone. She valued it herself, guarded it fiercely. The idea of spending her afternoons cleaning a suite where she would barely have to interact with its occupant was almost appealing. No small talk, no forced smiles, no pretending to care about whether guests had enjoyed their stay or needed recommendations for restaurants. At 5 minutes to 2, she stood before the private lift that led to the penthouse, her trolley beside her stocked with unscented products per Maggie's instructions, her heart beating faster than it should. The lift doors were brushed steel, so polished they reflected her distorted image back at her. She looked away immediately, as she always did. Mirrors were enemies, surfaces that forced her to confront what she'd become, this hollow-eyed ghost of the girl who'd once believed in the transformative power of words and beauty. The lift required a special keycard, which Maggie had given her, along with another warning look that suggested Clara's entire future at the Sovereign depended on not disturbing Mr. Calderon's carefully maintained equilibrium. As the doors closed and the lift began its smooth, almost silent ascent, Clara felt as though she were rising towards something she couldn't name, something that made her skin prickle, with an anxiety that had nothing to do with work performance and everything to do with a premonition she couldn't explain. The doors opened directly into the penthouse foyer, not a corridor like the other floors. The space was vast, minimalist, almost clinical in its precision. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the grey sea and the Brighton Pier in the distance, its Victorian ironwork and abandoned funfair rides creating a skeleton of former joy against the colourless sky. The decor was expensive but impersonal, as though no one truly lived here. Everything was in shades of white, grey and black. No photographs on the walls, no personal items visible on surfaces, no books left casually on coffee tables, no signs of human habitation beyond the absolute minimum. Just clean lines, expensive silence, and the constant presence of the sea through those enormous windows, grey meeting grey in an endless horizon. On the white console table near the entrance, there was a handwritten note on heavy cream paper. Clara picked it up, recognizing immediately that the handwriting was unusual. Precise, controlled, each letter formed with careful intention, almost like calligraphy, but without the flourishes. The handwriting of someone who believed that even the smallest gesture should be executed with complete attention. Please focus on the bedroom and bathroom today. Do not enter the study. Change the bedding to the grey set in the second drawer of the bureau. Leave 2 bottles of still water on the nightstand. Room temperature, not cold. Ensure the bathroom towels are replaced with the white set, not the cream. Thank you for your discretion. No signature, no greeting, just instructions, clear and courteous but utterly impersonal. But something about the handwriting made Clara pause. There was an elegance to it, but also a tension, as though the person had been holding their breath while writing each word. Concentrating intensely on this small act of communication, she began her work methodically, starting with the vast living area. The space was pristine, barely lived in. The white sofas looked unused, their cushions perfectly arranged. The kitchen area was immaculate, the expensive appliances gleaming but clearly untouched. In the sink there was a single mug, rinsed but not yet put in the dishwasher. Black coffee, judging by the faint stain at the bottom. No sugar, no milk. She washed it carefully and put it away in the cabinet, noting that there were only 4 mugs total, 4 plates, 4 of everything, as though the occupant had specifically limited his possessions to the bare minimum. The bedroom was through a wide doorway to the left. The bed was enormous, king-sized, covered in expensive linens that looked barely slept in. In fact, as she stripped the sheets, she realized they were hardly wrinkled. The creases were minimal, concentrated on one side of the bed, as though someone had lain on top of the covers rather than sleeping properly beneath them. The pillow on that side showed the faint indentation of a head, but the other pillow was untouched. Whoever slept here, if they slept at all, did so alone and restlessly. On the nightstand on the used side of the bed were 3 books stacked neatly: a philosophy text about surveillance and society by Michel Foucault, a worn collection of poetry by Emily Dickinson, with pages dog-eared and annotated, and a technical manual about neural networks and machine learning that looked brand new, unopened. The juxtaposition struck her immediately. Philosophy, poetry, technology. 3 different ways of understanding the world and human consciousness, all present in the reading material of a man who never seemed to leave his room. What kind of person read Dickinson and Foucault while staying in a luxury hotel for 8 months? What was he hiding from? Or perhaps more accurately, what was he trying to understand? In the bathroom, everything was immaculate, almost clinically so. One towel was damp on the heated rail, suggesting a recent shower, but everything else looked untouched. The toiletries were high-end but minimal. Unscented soap, plain shampoo, no cologne, no styling products, no unnecessary luxuries. The medicine cabinet was locked, which struck her as odd. Who locked their medicine cabinet in a hotel suite where the only people with access were discreet housekeeping staff, unless there was something inside he didn't want anyone to see? Prescription medications, perhaps, something that revealed a vulnerability he preferred to hide. As she cleaned the marble surfaces, she caught sight of herself in the enormous mirror above the double sinks and instinctively looked away, but not before seeing what she always saw. A young woman who looked older than her years, with dark circles under her eyes like bruises, and dark blonde hair pulled back so tightly into a bun that it made her head ache. She looked like someone trying to disappear into the walls, and perhaps she was. Perhaps that was the whole point of this life she'd constructed, this routine of invisibility and self-erasure. She finished the bathroom efficiently and returned to the bedroom to change the bedding. As she opened the second drawer of the large bureau to retrieve the grey sheets, she noticed something beneath the neatly folded linens, a photograph face down, as though someone had hidden it there deliberately, or perhaps had meant to throw it away but couldn't quite manage the final gesture of disposal. Her hand hovered over it. She knew she shouldn't look. It was a violation of the privacy he so clearly valued, the privacy Maggie had emphasized repeatedly. But something compelled her, that same instinct that had once made her want to write, to understand people, to see beneath surfaces and construct narratives that explained the inexplicable. Perhaps it was the writer in her, not quite dead despite her best efforts to kill that part of herself, along with everything else that had made her Isabel's sister, the girl who believed in beauty and meaning. She turned the photograph over. It showed a young woman, perhaps in her early 20s, with dark hair that fell in waves past her shoulders, and a bright smile that seemed to illuminate the image from within. She was standing on a beach somewhere sunny and warm, not grey like Brighton, with her arms spread wide as though embracing the sky itself. Behind her, the sea was turquoise and sparkling, so different from the pewter water outside these windows. She wore a simple white sundress and was barefoot, her feet half buried in golden sand. She looked free. She looked happy. She looked alive in a way that Clara no longer remembered how to be. Alive in a way that Isabel would never be again. "That's my sister." The voice came from behind her, soft and low, barely above a whisper, but it cut through the silence like a knife through silk. Clara dropped the photograph, her heart slamming against her ribs so hard she thought she might be sick. She spun around, instinctively stepping backward until her legs hit the bureau. He stood in the doorway of the study she'd been told not to enter, so still he could have been a photograph himself. He was tall, perhaps 6'2", with dark hair threaded with grey at the temples, despite what she estimated to be late 30s, early 40s. His eyes were difficult to read, somewhere between grey and blue, the exact colour of the sea outside on certain mornings when the sun tried to break through the clouds, but never quite succeeded. He wore black trousers perfectly tailored and a simple white shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows, revealing forearms that suggested someone who'd once been more physical than he appeared now. He was handsome in an austere way, like a photograph that had been carefully edited to remove anything excessive or unnecessary, all sharp angles and controlled stillness. "I'm sorry," Clara stammered, her face burning with embarrassment and fear. "I didn't mean to. I shouldn't have looked at... Maggie said not to touch anything personal and I... It's fine." He didn't move from the doorway, didn't come closer, but his gaze remained fixed on her with an intensity that made her feel utterly exposed. "I shouldn't have left it there. That was careless of me, sentimental and careless." His voice was unsettling in its calmness. There was no anger, no surprise, nothing that suggested she'd done anything wrong or that he was bothered by the intrusion. Just that quiet observation, as though he were commenting on the weather rather than catching someone looking at what was clearly a private, painful photograph. The lack of emotional response was somehow more disturbing than anger would have been. "I apologize." "Mr. Calderon," Clara said, using his name for the first time, trying to regain some sense of professional composure, even as her hands trembled. "It won't happen again. I'll finish the room and leave immediately. You know my name." It wasn't a question, but there was something in his tone that suggested he was noting this fact, filing it away for future reference in whatever system of understanding he used to organize the world, the head housekeeper told me. "Because of the specific requirements for the room, I'm covering for Sienna today." "I see." He took a single step into the bedroom and Clara instinctively tensed, though he maintained a careful distance. "And what's your name?" "Clara." She gave only her first name, a small rebellion against the way he seemed to be cataloguing information about her, collecting data points to construct some kind of profile. "Clara," he repeated, as though testing how the words sounded in his mouth, as though her name were a password he needed to memorize. "You're not the usual maid for this floor. I would have noticed you before." "No, I usually work the 7th floor. This is just for today. Are you afraid of me, Clara?" The question was so direct, so unexpected, that it jolted her like an electric shock. She wanted to lie, to say no, to maintain some dignity and professional demeanor. But something about his gaze made lying impossible. He looked at her as though he could see through layers, past her uniform and her careful blankness and her practiced invisibility, down to something she kept hidden even from herself. "I don't know you well enough to be afraid of you," she said carefully, choosing her words with the precision she'd once used to craft poems. A ghost of a smile touched his lips, the first real expression she'd seen on his face. "That's a diplomatic answer. Intelligent, but not an honest one. You are afraid. I can see it in your body language, in the way you've positioned yourself against the bureau as though you're preparing to bolt. But the interesting thing is, I don't think you're afraid of me specifically. You're afraid of being seen, of being noticed. You spend a great deal of energy trying to be invisible, don't you?" Clara felt her breath catch. How could he possibly know that? They'd exchanged perhaps a dozen sentences. "I should finish making the bed. Before you do that, let me tell you about my sister, about Eloise." He crossed to the nightstand and picked up the photograph she had dropped, holding it carefully as though it were fragile glass that might shatter at any moment. He looked at it for a long moment, his expression unreadable but his throat working as though he were swallowing something painful. "Her name was Eloise," he said quietly, still looking at the photograph rather than at Clara. "She died 3 years ago, Car accident on the M25 outside London. She was coming to visit me for the weekend. I was supposed to pick her up from King's Cross Station, but I was in the middle of a crucial business meeting, something I told myself couldn't wait. So I sent her a text message saying she should take a taxi, that I'd reimburse her, that I was sorry but this deal was important. She got into the taxi. The driver had been working a double shift. He fell asleep at the wheel at 80 miles per hour. The taxi went through the central barrier and into oncoming traffic. Eloise died instantly. The driver survived with minor injuries. Clara felt tears burning in her eyes. The parallel was too close, too painful. Isabel, the accident, the guilt, the way one small decision, one moment of selfishness or carelessness or simple human fallibility could destroy everything. She felt the familiar tightening in her chest, the sensation of the world narrowing down to a pinpoint where she couldn't breathe properly. "I'm sorry," she whispered, the words utterly inadequate. "I'm so sorry. I shouldn't have looked at the photograph. I shouldn't have—" "You understand," he interrupted, looking up at her now, really looking at her, and something shifted in his expression, something that made him seem less like a controlled photograph and more like an actual person. "You've lost someone too recently, someone you loved, someone whose death you blame yourself for, even though logically you know you're not responsible. But logic doesn't help, does it? The guilt is there anyway, eating away at you, making you want to disappear. I can see it in your eyes, in the way you hold yourself, in the way you flinched when I mentioned my sister. Am I right?" Clara couldn't speak. She just stood there, frozen, as tears spilled down her cheeks. No one had spoken to her about Isabel since the funeral. Her father had retreated into stoic silence, drinking himself to sleep every night in front of the television. Her friends from university had sent messages of condolence that gradually stopped when she didn't respond. She had built a wall around her grief and guilt, and now this stranger, this man she'd met 5 minutes ago, was dismantling it with surgical precision. "I should finish the room," she managed to say, though her voice was shaking. "I have other floors to cover after this. Stay." The command was soft but absolute, not aggressive, but containing an authority that made it almost impossible to disobey. "Please, just for a moment. I want to tell you something." She should have left. Every instinct, every rule of professional conduct, every ounce of common sense told her to grab her trolley and run. But her feet wouldn't move. She stood there, tears still streaming down her face, while he studied her with that unnerving intensity, as though she were a puzzle he needed to solve. "Do you know what I do, Clara?" he asked after a long moment of silence. "No." Her voice came out barely above a whisper. "I create systems that read people. Facial recognition algorithms, voice stress analysis, behavioral pattern prediction. My company, Calderon Systems, builds software that can predict what someone is going to do before they do it themselves. We analyze micro-expressions, vocal patterns, body language, and we translate all of that into data that can be used to assess risk, to prevent crime, to increase security. We sell it to corporations who want to know which employees are about to quit or steal from them. We sell it to police departments who want to identify suspects. We sell it to governments who want to monitor populations. It's made me extremely wealthy and extremely lonely." She didn't know what to say to that. The confession seemed too intimate for a conversation between strangers, between a guest and a maid. But perhaps that was exactly why he was telling her. Because she was just a maid, someone invisible, someone who wouldn't matter, who could be told secrets because she had no power to use them. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked, wiping at her tears with the back of her hand. "Because when you walked into this suite today, my system flagged you." He gestured toward a laptop that was open on the desk in the study, its screen glowing with what looked like complex data visualizations. "I have cameras throughout the suite. Not recording, I should be clear about that. Not storing footage, just analyzing in real time, feeding data to my assessment software. I built it myself, a personal version of what we sell to clients. Can't you, Clara, set off every alert I have?" Horror washed through her, cold and sharp. He had been watching her, analyzing her, reducing her pain to data points and algorithms, turning her private grief into information he could study. "That's a violation," she said, anger cutting through the tears now, making her voice stronger. "That's invasive and wrong, and I should report you to hotel management immediately." "You're absolutely right," he said, no defensiveness in his tone. "It is all of those things, which is why I'm telling you about it. Because I don't want to hide what I did. I saw you, Clara. Not just as data, though there was certainly that. Elevated stress hormones, micro-expressions indicating unresolved trauma, body language suggesting someone who's trying to make themselves invisible, a broken soul trying to hold the pieces together. The software gave me all of that within 30 seconds of you entering the suite." "Stop," Clara said, her voice breaking. "Please stop analyzing me." "But here's what the software couldn't tell me," Theo continued, his voice gentler now. "It couldn't tell me why. It couldn't tell me about the person you lost or the guilt you carry or the dreams you've given up. It could only identify that something was broken. And I recognize that pattern, Clara, because I see the exact same data when I analyze my own reflection. We're the same, you and I. We're both hiding from the world, both haunted by the dead, both trying to disappear into carefully constructed prisons of our own making. The anger drained away as quickly as it had come, replaced by something more complicated. Fear, yes, but also a terrible understanding. He was right. They were the same. This stranger in his expensive penthouse and the maid with her cleaning trolley, they were both ghosts, both lost, both drowning in guilt they couldn't escape. "I don't know what you want from me," Clara whispered. "I want to ask you something," Theo said, and for the first time there was hesitation in his voice, as though he was about to cross a line he'd never crossed before. "And you can say no. You can leave right now, and I'll request that they send a different maid tomorrow and we'll never see each other again. I'll respect whatever you choose. But I need to ask, what is it?" Clara heard herself say, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know the answer. He took a breath, his grey-blue eyes never leaving hers, and when he spoke, his voice was almost a whisper, laden with something that sounded like desperation. "Can I take off your bra?" The world stopped. Time seemed to suspend itself, the grey sea outside the windows freezing mid-wave. Clara's mind went completely blank, unable to process what she'd just heard. It was the most inappropriate, the most shocking thing anyone had ever said to her, the kind of proposition that should have sent her running from the room screaming for security. And yet there was nothing lustful in his tone. No predatory leer, no suggestive body language. It was a request made with strange reverence, as though he was asking permission for something sacred rather than sexual. "What?" The word came out barely audible, more breath than sound. "I'm not asking to touch you," Theo clarified immediately, taking a small step closer, but still maintaining a respectful distance. "I'm not propositioning you sexually. This isn't about desire or conquest or anything like that. I'm asking permission to help you remove something that's hurting you. I can see it in the way you move, Clara. That bra doesn't fit properly. It's too small, constricting you, the underwire digging into your ribs with every breath. It's causing you physical pain, but you wear it anyway every single day because it belonged to your mother, because it's a connection to before whatever happened that broke you. Am I right?" Tears burned in Clara's eyes again, fresh and hot. How could he know? How could he possibly know any of this? "My software can't tell me that," Theo continued, his voice gentle now, almost tender. "The algorithms can identify pain, but not its source or meaning. I had to guess, but I've become very good at reading what people hide beneath the surface. And you're hiding in plain sight, Clara. You're wearing that uncomfortable bra as a form of punishment, aren't you? The same way I punish myself, by living in this empty room, looking at the sea and remembering my sister on beaches I'll never visit with her. The same way I isolate myself and refuse human connection because I don't deserve it after what I did. We both know we're engaging in self-destruction. The only difference is I've given it 8 months of my life and millions in wealth, while you've chosen physical discomfort as your preferred method of penance." "You're insane," Clara whispered, but there was no conviction in her words. He wasn't insane. He was seeing things that no one else had seen, things she'd worked hard to hide even from herself. "Probably," Theo agreed with that ghost of a smile. "But I'm also right." Clara stood there, trembling, as something inside her began to crack open after 18 months of being sealed shut. She thought of Isabel's voice from their last conversation, the night before the accident, when they'd argued about Clara's tendency to sacrifice her own happiness for others. Isabel had been furious with her for dropping out of university to help their father with expenses, even though he'd insisted he didn't need help. "You're killing yourself slowly, Clara," Isabel had shouted. "That's not love. That's not duty. That's imprisonment. You're putting yourself in a cage and throwing away the key, and for what? So you can play the martyr. So you can punish yourself for wanting things, for being alive?" And then Isabel had died, and Clara had finished building the cage, adding locks and bars until she could barely breathe inside it. "I don't understand what you want from me," Clara said, her voice breaking on the words. "Nothing," Theo said, and the simplicity of the statement was somehow more powerful than any elaborate explanation. "I want nothing from you, Clara. I'm not asking you to sleep with me or spend time with me or tell me your secrets, but I want to give you something. Permission. Permission to stop punishing yourself. Permission to take off the thing that's hurting you, literally and metaphorically. You don't have to do it now. You don't have to do it with me here. You don't have to do it at all if you choose not to. But I'm giving you permission to let go, because sometimes we need someone else to tell us it's okay to stop suffering. We need someone to see us and say, you've done enough. You've hurt enough. You're allowed to breathe now." The grey sheets fell from Clara's hands, landing in a soft pile at her feet. She stood there in the bedroom of a stranger who somehow knew her better after 10 minutes than people who'd known her for years, and she cried for the first time since Isabel's funeral. Not the silent tears she'd shed moments ago, but real crying, the kind that came from somewhere deep and broken, the kind that shook her entire body and made her legs feel like they might give out beneath her. And Theo Calderon, the millionaire with his emotional surveillance systems and his pristine penthouse and his 8 months of self-imposed isolation, simply stood witness. He didn't approach her, didn't try to comfort her with physical touch, didn't offer platitudes about time healing wounds or everything happening for a reason. He just let her break, standing a respectful distance away, his hands at his sides, his expression unreadable but his eyes never leaving her face. When the tears finally subsided, leaving her feeling hollowed out and strangely lighter, Clara wiped her face with the back of her hand. "I need to finish my work," she said, her voice hoarse and raw. "I'm already behind schedule. Of course. I'll return to the study. Take as much time as you need. And I don't want to see you again. Tomorrow, I'll tell Maggie to send someone else. I can't do this." "Whatever this is, I understand," Theo said simply. No argument, no attempt to convince her otherwise. Just acceptance. But as he turned to leave, he spoke once more, his voice carrying across the vast bedroom. "Clara, before you go, just so you know, whatever you think you did that killed someone you loved, you're wrong. Guilt isn't the same as responsibility. Feelings aren't facts, and holding on to guilt won't bring them back. It will just kill you more slowly, day by day, until there's nothing left of who you were before. I know because I've been doing the same thing for 3 years. I've built an empire out of understanding human emotion, and I can't even allow myself to feel my own. But seeing you today, seeing someone else caught in the same trap, it made me realize something. We're allowed to survive. We're allowed to live. The people we lost wouldn't want this for us. They'd want us to breathe and feel and exist fully. Heloise would be furious if she knew I'd spent 3 years hiding in hotel rooms and perfecting algorithms to avoid actual human connection. Who would be furious at you, Clara?" "Isabel," Clara whispered without thinking, the name escaping before she could stop it. "My sister. She'd be furious." Theo nodded as though she'd confirmed something he'd suspected. Then maybe it's time to stop making her furious. Maybe it's time to honor her by actually living. He disappeared into the study, closing the door quietly behind him. Clara stood in the bedroom for a long moment, staring at the door, feeling as though the ground had shifted beneath her feet. Then, moving mechanically, she finished making the bed, replaced the towels in the bathroom, left the 2 bottles of water on the nightstand as instructed. She worked efficiently, her mind numb, her body operating on automatic, while her heart tried to process what had just happened. When she finally left the penthouse, pushing her trolley back into the private lift, she was still shaking. The doors closed, and she caught sight of her reflection in the polished steel, red-eyed and pale, looking even more haunted than usual. But there was something else there too, something she hadn't seen in her face for 18 months. A question. A tiny spark of curiosity about whether he might be right, whether she could actually stop punishing herself, whether living was something she was still allowed to do. That night, in her small bedsit in Hove, a converted studio in a Victorian house that smelled of damp and old carpet, Clara sat on her narrow bed and stared at the wall. The room was barely furnished, just the bed, a small wardrobe, an electric kettle on a shelf, a tiny bathroom through a door that didn't close properly. She'd moved here after Isabel died, unable to stay in the house she'd shared with her father, unable to bear being surrounded by reminders of her sister. This place was anonymous, temporary, perfect for someone who was just marking time until she disappeared completely. She thought about Theo Calderon's words, about permission, about the bra that dug into her ribs with every breath, that marked her skin with red welts, that served no purpose except to remind her that she was supposed to be suffering. Slowly, as though moving through water, Clara stood and walked to the cracked mirror that hung over the small sink. She forced herself to look, really look, for the first time in months. She saw a young woman with dark blonde hair that needed washing, dark circles that spoke of endless sleepless nights, a face that had forgotten how to smile. But beneath all that, beneath the grief and guilt and exhaustion, there was still a person, still Clara, still someone who'd once written poetry and believed in beauty and dreamed of being a writer whose words could make people feel less alone. She reached behind her back, her fingers fumbling with the hooks of the bra. The old lace caught on her skin, resistant as though it didn't want to let go. But finally the hooks released and the bra fell away. Clara pulled it through her sleeve without removing her shirt, the way women do, and held it in her hands. The cream-colored lace, the tiny embroidered flowers, the worn elastic that had lost most of its stretch. Her mother's bra. The last tangible connection to a woman who died when Clara was 17, leaving her daughter with nothing but debts and this small piece of delicate underwear that represented a gentler time. Clara looked at herself in the mirror without the constriction, able to breathe fully for the first time in what felt like years. Her ribs ached from the sudden freedom, and she could see the red marks where the underwire had dug into her skin, but she could also see herself more clearly. Not her mother. Not Isabel. Just Clara, alive, breathing here. She folded the bra carefully and placed it in the small drawer of her bedside table, not throwing it away, not abandoning it, but putting it aside, choosing just for tonight not to hurt herself. Her mobile phone, a cheap model she'd bought after selling her smartphone to pay for Isabel's funeral flowers, buzzed on the bed. Her text message from an unknown number. "There's a notebook in the bottom section of your trolley. I put it there while you were in the bathroom. It's blank. Maybe one day you'll write in it again. Maybe not. Either way, it's yours. No obligation. No expectation. No strings attached. Just a gift from one broken soul to another. You don't have to thank me. You don't have to acknowledge this message. But if you ever want to talk, I'm in the penthouse. And I'm not going anywhere." Clara stared at the message for a long moment, then walked to where she'd left her work trolley in the corner of the room. She'd brought it home, as she sometimes did when there were supplies that needed restocking for the next day. In the bottom section, hidden beneath packages of cleaning supplies, was a leather-bound notebook. She pulled it out, her hands shaking. The notebook was expensive, the kind she used to dream of owning when she was a literature student, when she'd spend her lunch breaks in the university bookshop touching beautiful journals she couldn't afford. The leather was butter-soft under her fingers, the color a deep burgundy that reminded her of wine and autumn leaves. When she opened it, she saw the pages were thick cream paper, the kind that would hold ink beautifully without bleeding through. On the first page, in that same careful handwriting from the daily instructions, was a quote from Emily Dickinson. "Hope is the thing with feathers that perches in the soul, and sings the tune without the words, and never stops at all." Clara sat on her bed, the notebook in her lap, and for the first time in 18 months, she felt something flicker in her chest. Not happiness, not forgiveness, not the absence of guilt, but something small and tentative and impossibly fragile. Something that might eventually, with time and patience and permission to exist, become them. A tiny bird with feathers, beginning to sing a tune without words, refusing to stop even in the darkness. Clara didn't return to the penthouse the next day. She called Maggie at 6 in the morning, her voice still rough from the previous night's tears, and claimed she was coming down with Something, a flu perhaps. Nothing serious, but she didn't want to risk infecting the guests. Maggie was irritated. Clara could hear it in the sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line, but she agreed to have Sienna cover the penthouse floor again. Clara spent that Wednesday in her bedsit, the burgundy notebook sitting on her small table like an accusation or an invitation. She couldn't decide which. She didn't write in it. She couldn't. The blank pages seemed to demand something from her that she wasn't ready to give. Instead, she lay in bed and stared at the ceiling, watching the grey light shift across the cracked plaster as the day progressed from morning to afternoon to evening. She thought about Theo Calderon's question, about the bra now folded in her drawer, about the way he'd looked at her as though he could see straight through to her bones. She thought about Isabel, which was nothing new, except this time the thoughts were different. Less about the accident, less about Clara's guilt for encouraging her sister to go to that party in London, where she'd met the boy who'd later convinced her to visit that weekend. Less about the endless loop of what-ifs and if-onlys. Instead, she thought about what Isabel would say if she could see Clara now, living in this depressing room, working a job that required nothing of her mind or heart, slowly erasing herself from existence. Isabel would be furious. Isabel would grab her by the shoulders and shake her, and demand to know what the hell she thought she was doing wasting her life like this. Isabel, who'd been so full of energy and ambition and dreams, who'd been studying architecture at UCL and wanted to design buildings that would make people feel something, who'd believed that spaces and structures could heal or harm, who'd seen beauty in everything and possibility in everyone. Isabel wouldn't want this half-life for her sister. Isabel would want Clara to write again, to dream again, to exist fully rather than just survive. But knowing what Isabel would want and actually doing it were two entirely different things. By Thursday, Clara was back at work, though she requested to stay on the 7th floor. Maggie gave her an odd look, but didn't question it, and Clara spent the day cleaning the familiar rooms with their familiar debris of other people's lives. Everything should have felt normal, back to routine, back to the predictable pattern that kept her safe and numb, except nothing felt normal anymore. She kept thinking about the penthouse 14 floors above her head. She kept wondering what Theo was doing, whether he'd noticed she hadn't returned, whether he was looking at his surveillance data and analyzing her absence. The thought should have made her uncomfortable, this man with his cameras and algorithms, but instead she felt something else, seen. For better or worse, Theo Calderon had seen her in a way no one else had in 18 months. That evening, as she was leaving through the staff entrance at the back of the hotel, she found an envelope tucked under her windscreen wiper. Her car was a battered Ford Fiesta, 15 years old and perpetually on the verge of breakdown, parked in the far corner of the staff lot where no one ever went. There was no way this envelope had ended up on her car by accident. Clara looked around, but the car park was empty in the grey twilight. She pulled the envelope free and opened it with shaking hands. Inside was a single sheet of that same heavy cream paper, and written in that careful, precise handwriting was a poem. Not a famous poem this time, not Dickinson or any other poet she recognized. An original poem, and she knew immediately who had written it. I have been learning to read the spaces between words, the silence where meaning lives, the pause before someone looks away. I built machines to measure heartbeats, to quantify the unquantifiable, to reduce the human soul to data points and patterns. But you cannot be reduced. You are the error in my system, the variable I cannot control, the question I cannot answer. I saw you and my algorithms failed, because how do you measure the weight of grief or the depth of a person disappearing into themselves, or the exact moment when someone decides whether to keep living or to simply survive? I don't know what I'm asking for. Perhaps nothing, perhaps everything, perhaps just this. To see you again, to fail at understanding you again, to be reminded that some things cannot be measured, only felt. Clara read it 3 times, standing in the car park as the evening grew darker and the first drops of rain began to fall. Her hands trembled. The poem was raw, almost painfully vulnerable, completely unlike the controlled, precise man she'd met in the penthouse. It was also good, genuinely good, with that quality of truth that separated real poetry from mere words arranged in lines. Theo Calderon, millionaire tech entrepreneur, wrote poetry, and he'd written this one for her. She should have been alarmed, should have seen this as inappropriate, as boundary crossing, as evidence that she needed to report him to hotel management and stay far away from the penthouse. But instead, she felt that small bird with feathers in her chest flutter its wings, felt something long dormant begin to wake up. Because the poem understood. It understood the difference between living and surviving, understood the impossibility of measuring grief, understood that she was disappearing. And in understanding, it offered something she hadn't realized she was desperate for: recognition. Not just being seen, but being comprehended. That night in her bedsit, Clara finally opened the burgundy notebook. She didn't write a poem, she wasn't ready for that. But she wrote words, just words, letting them flow without judgment or purpose. She wrote about Isabel's laugh, the way it had been too loud and unself-conscious, the way it had filled rooms and made strangers smile. She wrote about the accident, but not the guilt this time. Just the facts, simple and terrible. Isabel was 21, she was visiting a boy she'd met. The taxi driver fell asleep. Isabel died on impact. She wrote about the bra, about her mother, about the way grief could become a comfortable prison, because at least in prison you knew the dimensions of your pain. You knew what to expect. She wrote until her hand cramped and the cheap pen ran out of ink, and when she finally stopped, the sky outside was turning grey with dawn. She slept for 3 hours and woke with a decision already made. She would return to the penthouse. Not because Theo had asked her to, not because of the poem, though the poem had certainly affected her. She would return because something was happening inside her, something small but unmistakable, and she needed to see where it led. She needed to know if this tiny awakening could survive proximity to the man who'd triggered it, or if it would collapse under the weight of reality, and she'd retreat back into comfortable numbness. At exactly 2 o'clock that Friday afternoon, Clara stood before the private lift with her trolley and the keycard Maggie had given her with barely concealed relief. Sienna had apparently complained about the penthouse guest, said he'd been cold and distant, more so than usual, that he'd left notes requesting she not return. Maggie seemed to think Clara had made some kind of positive impression, though Clara suspected the reality was far more complicated. The lift ascended smoothly. Clara's heart raced. She didn't know what she would say to him, didn't know what she wanted from this encounter. The doors opened into the familiar minimalist foyer, but something was different today. Music played softly from somewhere inside the suite. Something classical and melancholy, strings and piano weaving together in a way that made her chest ache. The Daily Note was on the console table as always, but when she picked it up, the instructions were different. If you're reading this, you came back. I wasn't sure you would. Please clean as you normally would, but when you're finished, if you're willing, I'd like to speak with you. I'll be on the terrace. No pressure, no obligation, but I'd like the chance to explain myself properly, without shocking you with inappropriate questions. The terrace door is open if you choose to join me. If not, I understand completely, and I'll ensure a different maid is assigned to this floor going forward. Either way, thank you for coming back. It means more than you can possibly know. Clara read the note twice, then folded it carefully and slipped it into her uniform pocket. She began her work, moving through the suite with practiced efficiency, but her mind was elsewhere. The bedroom was the same as before, barely slept in. The bathroom was spotless except for that single damp towel. But in the study, which she could now see through the open door, there was evidence of activity. The desk was covered in papers, printouts of what looked like code and graphs and data visualizations. Empty coffee mugs sat in precarious stacks. A blanket was draped over the desk chair, suggesting someone had slept there rather than in the bed. Theo Calderon was working on something that was consuming him. She finished cleaning in 45 minutes, faster than usual, driven by a nervous energy she couldn't quite name. Then she stood in the living area, staring at the open glass door that led to the terrace. Beyond it, she could see a section of grey sky and the edge of a modern outdoor furniture arrangement. She could hear the sea, that constant presence, waves against the shore like the heartbeat of the city. She could leave. She could walk to the lift and press the button and descend back to her normal life and never come back. It would be the safe choice, the sensible choice. But Clara was tired of safe choices. Safe choices had led her to this bedsit and this cleaning job, and this slow disappearance. Isabel had never made safe choices, had lived boldly and loudly and without apology, and yes, that had led to her death, but it had also led to 21 years of actually living. Clara walked through the open door onto the terrace. The space was larger than she'd expected, probably 40 feet of private outdoor area, with glass barriers that offered unobstructed views of the sea and the city. The furniture was modern and expensive, grey-weathered wood and cream cushions. Hand sitting in one of the chairs, a laptop balanced on his knees despite the outdoor setting, was Theo Calderon. He wore black jeans today and a dark grey sweater, and he looked tired, shadows under those grey-blue eyes, hair slightly dishevelled as though he'd been running his hands through it repeatedly. He looked up as she stepped onto the terrace, and something shifted in his expression. Relief, she thought, and something else, something more complicated. "You came," he said simply, closing the laptop and setting it aside. "I got your poem," Clara said, then immediately felt foolish. That sounded like an accusation when she'd meant it as an explanation. "I'm sorry if that was inappropriate. I don't know the rules anymore. I've spent 3 years avoiding human connection, and now I'm apparently doing everything wrong in my attempt to establish it." "It wasn't inappropriate," Clara said, surprised to find she meant it. "It was beautiful and true. That's what made it powerful. The truth in it." Theo studied her for a long moment. "Will you sit, please? I promise I won't say anything shocking or ask any strange questions. I just want to talk if you're willing." Clara hesitated, then moved to the chair across from him. The cushion was soft, expensive, more comfortable than anything in her bedsit. From here, she could see the entire sweep of Brighton Beach, the pier a dark skeleton against the grey water, the city rising in layers of white buildings and modern glass structures behind it. "I want to explain," Theo said, leaning forward, his hands clasped between his knees, "about the cameras, about the software, about why I asked you that question about the bra. I know it must have seemed insane or predatory or both, but I need you to understand it wasn't either of those things." "Okay," Clara said quietly. "I'm listening." "I started Calderon Systems 8 years ago with 2 university friends. We were computer science students at Imperial College, fascinated by artificial intelligence and human behavior. The original idea was noble, or at least we told ourselves it was. We wanted to create systems that could identify people in distress, people who needed help but couldn't ask for it. Potential suicide risks, abuse victims, people suffering silently. We thought we could save lives by reading the signs others missed." He paused, his jaw tightening. "But noble ideas don't pay investors. Noble ideas don't lead to billion-pound valuations. Our investors wanted applications that could be monetized. Security firms wanted to identify potential threats. Corporations wanted to identify employee problems before they affected productivity. Governments wanted population monitoring. So we pivoted, as they say in Silicon Valley. We kept the technology but changed its purpose. And it worked. It worked brilliantly. We sold our software to anyone who could pay, and we became obscenely wealthy." "But you regret it," Clara said. "It wasn't a question. I regret many things. I regret that our technology is now used to suppress dissent and surveil populations. I regret that I prioritized profit over ethics. But mostly I regret that I became so good at reading other people's emotions that I completely stopped feeling my own. The software became a shield. I could analyze data about someone's sadness without actually feeling empathy for them. I could predict someone's behavior without actually caring about them as a person. I became a ghost, Clara, just like you. I disappeared into my work and my wealth and my guilt about Eloise, and I convinced myself that was enough. That survival was enough. The music inside the suite changed. Something more complex now, Bach perhaps, mathematical and emotional at once. When you walked into the suite 3 days ago, Theo continued, my software flagged you immediately. But it was more than that. I saw you, really saw you, and I recognized myself. Your body language, the way you tried to be invisible, the way you moved as though you were already a ghost haunting your own life. And I realized something that terrified me. I realized I could spend the rest of my life in this penthouse, perfecting my algorithms and avoiding human connection. And it wouldn't matter. It wouldn't mean anything, because I'd just be surviving, not living. And what's the point of surviving if you're already dead inside? Clara felt tears prickling at her eyes. His words were hitting too close to home, articulating things she'd felt but never put into words. The question about the bra, Theo said, his voice softer now, that came from something my sister once told me. About 6 months before she died, Eloise came to visit me in London. She was worried about me, said I'd become cold and mechanical. She told me this story about how after our mother died, she'd worn our mother's cardigan every day for 2 years. It didn't fit properly, it was old-fashioned, it made her look frumpy, but she wore it anyway. She said it was like wearing armor made of grief. She thought it was keeping her connected to our mother, but really it was keeping her trapped in the past. One day, a friend gently suggested she might want to stop wearing it, that maybe it was time to let go. She was furious at first, but then she realized the friend was right. She was hiding in that cardigan, using it as an excuse not to move forward. When she finally took it off and packed it away, she said it felt like she could breathe for the first time in 2 years. He paused, looking directly at Clara. When I saw you, when my software analyzed your movement patterns, I could see something was constricting you physically. The way you breathed, the way you held your shoulders, the micro-expressions of pain. And I thought about Eloise and that cardigan, and I realized you were wearing something similar, something that hurt you but that you couldn't let go of, because letting go felt like betrayal. So I asked, badly, inappropriately, but I asked, because I wanted to give you what that friend gave Eloise. Permission to breathe. Clara wiped at her eyes with the back of her hand. It was my mother's bra, she said, her voice shaking. She died when I was 17, cancer. It was fast and brutal, and afterward, I found it in her drawer. It was the nicest thing she owned, this cream lace bra that she'd bought for herself on a rare good day. She never had money for luxuries, but she'd saved for this one small beautiful thing. I kept it. And after Isabel died, after my sister died 18 months ago, I started wearing it. I'm not even sure why. Maybe because it connected me to both of them. Maybe because the physical pain felt appropriate. Maybe because I wanted to disappear and the discomfort helped me do that, made me focus on something other than the grief. How did Isabel die? Theo asked gently. Clara took a shuddering breath. Car accident. She was coming home from London after visiting a boy she'd met. I was the one who encouraged her to go. Even though she was nervous about traveling alone at night, she called me from the train station, said she was tired and maybe she should just come back in the morning. But I told her not to be silly, told her to just get a taxi, that it would be fine. The taxi driver had been working a double shift. He fell asleep at the wheel on the A23. The taxi went off the road and hit a tree. Isabel died instantly. The driver walked away with a broken arm. And you've been blaming yourself ever since, Theo said. Because you told her to get the taxi. Because if you just let her wait until morning, she'd still be alive. Yes, Clara whispered. Yes, it's my fault she's dead. No, Theo said firmly. It's the fault of a system that allows drivers to work double shifts until they're dangerously exhausted. It's the fault of a taxi company that prioritizes profit over safety. It's the fault of a tired driver who made a terrible mistake. It's a tragedy, Clara, but it's not your fault. You gave your sister advice that should have been perfectly safe. You couldn't have known what would happen. You're not responsible for every variable in the universe. Logically, I know that, Clara said, tears streaming down her face now. But logic doesn't help. The guilt is still there. The knowledge that if I'd just said something different, made a different choice, she'd be alive. I can't escape it. I know, Theo said quietly. Believe me, I know. I've spent 3 years trapped in the exact same loop. If I'd just left that meeting, if I'd just picked Eloise up from the station like I'd promised, if I'd valued my sister over my career for one single day, she'd still be alive. I understand guilt, Clara. I live with it every moment. But I'm starting to realize that living with guilt isn't the same as honoring the people we lost. Eloise wouldn't want me to spend my life in this penthouse, isolated and empty. She'd want me to actually do something with the success I've achieved, to use my skills and resources, to help people, rather than just surveilling them. And your Isabel, what would she want for you? She'd want me to write, Clara said immediately. She'd want me to finish my degree and become a writer, and create things that mattered. She used to read my poems and cry, said they made her feel understood. She believed in me more than I believed in myself. Then maybe it's time to start believing in yourself the way she did, Theo said. Maybe it's time to honor her by actually living the life she wanted for you. They sat in silence for a long moment, the sound of the sea constant beneath their conversation. The grey sky was darkening toward evening, and the first lights were coming on along the seafront, strings of illumination marking the boundary between land and water. Why are you still here? Clara asked suddenly. In this hotel? After 8 months? What are you hiding from? Theo smiled grimly. That's a complicated question, with an even more complicated answer. The short version is that I'm hiding from my own company, from my partners, from the monster I helped create. What do you mean? He stood and walked to the glass barrier, looking out at the sea. Clara noticed how he moved, controlled and deliberate, as though he was always conscious of taking up space in the world. 6 months ago, Theo said, his back to her, I discovered that my partners, my university friends who'd built Calderon systems with me, had been selling a modified version of our software to regimes known for human rights abuses. Democratic governments use our technology for security and crime prevention, but authoritarian governments use it to identify dissidents, to track activists, to suppress free speech. Our software was being used to disappear people, Clara, to identify them, track them, and ultimately imprison or kill them. And my partners knew. They'd known for over a year and had hidden it from me because they knew I'd object. Oh God, Clara breathed. I confronted them. I demanded we cease all contracts with these governments immediately, that we implement strict ethical guidelines for all future sales. They refused, said I was being naive. That business was business, that we couldn't control how clients used our product. We fought for weeks. Eventually I realized I had 2 choices: stay and be complicit, or leave and try to stop them. So I left. I took my shares, my knowledge, and I disappeared. I've been in this hotel for 8 months, living off my wealth while I try to figure out how to destroy the company I created. Clara stared at his back, trying to process this information. Destroy it how? That's what I've been working on, Theo said, turning to face her. Those papers in the study, the code, the data visualizations. I've been building a virus, essentially. A piece of software that will infiltrate Calderon Systems' servers and corrupt the core algorithms. It won't just shut down the software temporarily. It will fundamentally break it in ways that can't be easily repaired. It will take them years to rebuild, if they can rebuild at all. And in that time, I'm going to release all the documentation I have about the unethical contracts, the human rights abuses, everything. I'm going to burn it all down. Won't that destroy you too? Clara asked. Financially, legally, reputation-wise. Yes, Theo said simply. It will probably bankrupt me. I'll likely face lawsuits from investors and partners. My reputation in the tech world will be ruined. I might even face criminal charges for corporate sabotage. But I've made my peace with that. I created something that's being used to harm people, and I need to take responsibility for that. I need to do something that actually matters, even if it costs me everything. Clara stood and joined him at the barrier, looking out at the darkening sea. That's terrifying, she said, and brave, possibly insane, but also brave. I prefer to think of it as penance, Theo said with a slight smile. 3 years too late, but penance nonetheless. When? Clara asked. When are you going to do it? Soon, within the next few weeks. I'm nearly finished with the virus. I just need to refine a few elements, ensure it will work properly. And then I'll deploy it and release the documents simultaneously. It will be chaos, Clara. It will be the end of everything I've built, but at least I'll be able to look at myself in the mirror again. They stood side by side, not touching, but somehow connected by their shared understanding of guilt and penance and the complicated mathematics of trying to make amends for past mistakes. The wind picked up, carrying the salt smell of the sea and the distant sounds of the city behind them. I started writing again, Clara said quietly. Last night, after I got your poem. I haven't written anything in 18 months, but last night I filled almost 20 pages of that notebook you gave me. It wasn't poetry exactly, just words, memories, thoughts. But it felt like something. Theo turned to look at her, and the expression on his face was unguarded in a way she hadn't seen before. That's wonderful, Clara, truly wonderful. I don't know what it means, she continued. I don't know if I can actually go back to university, finish my degree, become the writer Isabel wanted me to be. But I think maybe I want to try. I think maybe I'm tired of disappearing. Then don't disappear, Theo said softly. Stay visible. Stay here on this terrace in this moment, breathing and existing and feeling things. That's all any of us can do, really. Decide to keep existing, keep trying, keep feeling, even when it's painful. Clara looked at him, really looked at him, and saw not the millionaire tech entrepreneur, or the man with the surveillance systems. but just another broken person trying to find a way to keep living after loss. They were the same, she and Theo Calderon, not in circumstances or wealth or power, but in the fundamental struggle to believe they deserved to exist after the people they loved had died. "Can I see you again?" Theo asked. "Not as your client, not as the guest you're assigned to clean for, but as a person who'd like to know you better. We could have dinner or just talk or sit in silence and watch the sea together. Whatever you're comfortable with." Clara should have said no, should have maintained professional boundaries, protected herself from whatever this was becoming. But she was tired of should-haves and what-ifs and safe choices that led nowhere. "Yes," she heard herself say, "I'd like that." Theo smiled, a real smile this time, and it transformed his face completely. He looked younger suddenly, less austere, more human. "Tomorrow night? I'll cook dinner. Nothing fancy, just something simple. Here on the terrace, if the weather permits." "You cook?" Clara asked, surprised. "One of the few life skills I've maintained despite my isolation. I find cooking meditative. The precision of it, the chemistry, the transformation of raw ingredients into something nourishing. It's one of the few times my mind actually quiets down." "Okay," Clara said, feeling that small bird with feathers flutter wildly in her chest. "Tomorrow night. But I need to tell you something first. I'm not ready for anything physical. I'm not ready for romance or sex or whatever this might become. I just need someone who understands." "Can you accept that?" "Absolutely," Theo said without hesitation. "I'm not ready for those things either, Clara. I'm not asking for a relationship. I'm asking for connection, for understanding, for the chance to be in the presence of someone who gets it, who knows what it's like to carry this weight. Everything else can wait or never happen at all. I just want to not be alone for a few hours. Is that okay?" "Yes," Clara said, relief washing through her. "That's more than okay. That's exactly what I need too." As she left the penthouse that evening, riding the lift down to the ground floor, Clara felt different. Lighter somehow, as though the act of being honest about her pain, of sharing it with someone who truly understood, had eased some of the weight she'd been carrying. She thought about Isabel, about what her sister would say if she could see Clara now, starting to write again, agreeing to have dinner with a strange millionaire who wrote poetry and wanted to destroy his own company. Isabel would approve, Clara thought. Isabel would tell her to be brave, to take chances, to actually live instead of just surviving. That night in her bedsit, Clara wrote again. This time the words came faster, more fluid. She wrote about the terrace and the grey sea, and the man who'd seen her when she thought she was invisible. She wrote about the complicated mathematics of guilt and forgiveness. She wrote about the small bird with feathers that was starting to sing more loudly, its tune without words beginning to sound almost like hope. Clara spent all of Saturday in a state of nervous anticipation that bordered on panic. She changed her clothes 4 times before her shift at the hotel, settling finally on jeans and a simple black jumper, then immediately second-guessing the choice. It was absurd, really, this anxiety over dinner with a man she barely knew. But something about Theo Calderon had gotten under her skin, past the carefully constructed walls she'd built around herself. He saw her, and being seen was both terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. She worked her normal shift on the 7th floor, cleaning rooms and folding sheets and trying not to think about the evening ahead. But every time she passed a window, she found herself looking up, toward the penthouse 14 floors above, wondering what he was doing, whether he was as nervous as she was, whether this was all a terrible mistake. Maggie noticed her distraction and commented on it with a sharp look. But Clara just mumbled something about not sleeping well and focused on scrubbing a bathtub until her hands ached. At 6 o'clock, she left the hotel through the main entrance rather than the staff exit, went home to her bedsit, and stood under the weak spray of her shower for 20 minutes, trying to calm her racing heart. She washed her hair properly for the first time in days, used the expensive conditioner she'd been saving, shaved her legs even though she had no intention of anyone seeing them. She told herself it was about self-care, about reclaiming small rituals of femininity she'd abandoned after Isabel died. But she knew deep down that it was also about Theo, about wanting to be seen as something other than a ghost in a maid's uniform. She dressed carefully, a simple dark blue dress she'd bought years ago for a university event and hadn't worn since, tights because the evening was cold, a cardigan that had belonged to Isabel. She left her hair down, which felt strange and vulnerable after months of pulling it back in that severe bun. She put on a small amount of makeup, just mascara and lip balm, nothing dramatic. When she looked at herself in the cracked mirror, she barely recognized the woman staring back. Not the old Clara, the girl who'd written poetry and believed in beauty, but not the ghost either. Someone in between, someone emerging. At 7:30, she stood in front of the hotel again, but this time she didn't go through the staff entrance. She walked through the grand front doors like a guest, her heart pounding so loudly she was certain everyone in the lobby could hear it. The concierge, a man named Marcus, who'd always been polite to her in the corridors, looked at her with surprise and something that might have been concern. "Clara? Is everything all right? I'm visiting a guest," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Mr. Calderon in the penthouse." Marcus's eyebrows rose slightly, but he was too professional to comment. "Of course. I'll let him know you're on your way up." He reached for the phone, but Clara stopped him. "He's expecting me. He gave me the key card." She pulled it from her bag. The same key card Maggie had given her for cleaning, but holding it now felt different, illicit somehow, as though she were crossing a line she couldn't uncross. Marcus nodded slowly. "Have a pleasant evening." The lift ride up felt eternal. Clara watched her reflection in the polished steel doors, trying to recognize herself, trying to understand what she was doing. This wasn't professional. This wasn't safe. This was stepping out of the carefully controlled parameters of her half-life and into something unknown and potentially dangerous. But Isabel's voice echoed in her head. "You're allowed to live, Clara. You're allowed to take chances. Stop being so fucking careful all the time." The lift doors opened directly into the penthouse foyer, and Clara's breath caught. The space had been transformed. Soft lighting, nothing harsh or clinical, just warm amber glows from lamps she hadn't noticed before. Music played, something instrumental and gentle, piano notes that felt like water flowing. The floor-to-ceiling windows showed the city lights beginning to sparkle against the darkening sky, and beyond them, the sea was a vast darkness, the boundary between water and sky nearly invisible. Theo emerged from the kitchen area, and Clara's heart did something complicated in her chest. He wore dark jeans and a simple grey sweater, his hair slightly damp as though he'd recently showered. He looked nervous, she realized. This controlled, precise man who'd built an empire analyzing human emotion actually looked nervous. "Clara," he said, and even in that single word, she could hear relief and something else, something warmer. "You came. I wasn't entirely sure you would." "I almost didn't," she admitted, stepping fully into the space. "I changed my clothes 4 times and nearly called to cancel at least 6 times. A smile touched his lips. "I'm glad you didn't. Can I take your cardigan?" Clara hesitated, then slipped off Isabel's cardigan and handed it to him. He hung it carefully on a coat stand near the entrance, and she noticed the gentleness of the gesture, the care he took with something that belonged to her. "I made dinner," Theo said. "Nothing elaborate. I hope you're not vegetarian because I completely forgot to ask and I made lamb." "I'm not vegetarian," Clara said, following him toward the dining area, "and I can't remember the last time someone cooked for me." "Actually, I can. It was my sister, the week before she died. She made this incredibly complicated pasta dish she'd learned from a YouTube video, and it was terrible, completely inedible, but we ate it anyway and laughed until we cried." Theo turned to look at her, his expression soft. "That's a good memory." "It is," Clara agreed, surprised to find that remembering didn't hurt quite as much as it usually did. "I've been avoiding good memories because they made the loss feel more acute, but maybe that was wrong. Maybe the good memories are the point." The dining table had been set simply but beautifully. 2 place settings, white plates and actual cloth napkins, candles flickering in glass holders. Through the windows the city sparkled, and Clara realized she'd never seen Brighton from this height, this perspective. It looked almost magical, as though she were looking at a completely different city than the one she'd been trudging through for 18 months. "Sit, please," Theo said, pulling out a chair for her. "I'll bring the food." He disappeared into the kitchen, and Clara sat, her hands folded in her lap, trying to calm her breathing. This was just dinner, just 2 people sharing a meal. It didn't have to mean anything beyond that. Except it did mean something, she knew that. It meant she was choosing to be here, choosing connection over isolation, choosing to be seen rather than invisible. Theo returned with plates balanced expertly, and the food looked and smelled incredible. Roasted lamb with rosemary, roasted vegetables that gleamed with olive oil, small potatoes that were perfectly golden. He set a plate in front of her, then sat across from her, and for a moment they just looked at each other. "Before we eat," Theo said quietly, "I want to say something. Thank you for being here. Thank you for giving me a chance to be something other than alone. I know this is strange, this whole situation. I know there are power dynamics and professional boundaries that we're probably violating. But I needed you to know that I don't take this lightly. Your presence here, your willingness to see me as something other than a hotel guest or a tech millionaire or whatever other label people use, it means everything." Clara felt tears prick at her eyes. "I needed this too," she said. "I didn't realize how much until right now. I've been so lonely, Theo, so incredibly lonely. And it's the kind of loneliness that has nothing to do with being alone and everything to do with feeling like no one can see you. But you see me. You see me in a way that should be uncomfortable but somehow isn't. To being seen," Theo said, raising his water glass, "and to the courage it takes to let ourselves be seen." Clara raised her glass and clinked it against his. To being seen. The food was extraordinary. Clara hadn't realized how hungry she was until she started eating, and then she couldn't stop. The lamb was tender and perfectly seasoned. The vegetables were caramelized and sweet. Everything was exactly right. They ate in comfortable silence for a while. Just the sound of cutlery against plates and the soft piano music in the background and the distant whisper of the sea. "This is incredible," Clara said finally. "Where did you learn to cook like this?" "My mother," Theo said. "She was French, from Lyon, and she believed that cooking was an art form as important as any other. She taught Eloise and me from a young age. After she died when I was 20, I kept cooking because it made me feel close to her. It's one of the few things that survived my transformation into a workaholic tech entrepreneur." "Tell me about her," Clara said. "Your mother." Theo's expression softened. "She was formidable. That's the word that comes to mind. She emigrated to England when she married my father, an English professor at Oxford, and she never quite fit in. She kept her accent, her French citizenship, her fierce opinions about everything from politics to the proper way to make an omelette. She died of a stroke when I was 20, and Eloise was 17. One moment she was arguing with my father about his terrible taste in wine. The next, she was on the floor and gone. We didn't even get to say goodbye." "I'm so sorry," Clara said softly. "3 great losses," Theo said, his voice distant. "My mother, sudden and shocking. My father, 5 years later, lung cancer, slow and agonizing, and then Eloise, the worst one because it was preventable. Because I could have stopped it if I'd just made a different choice. 3 deaths and I'm the only one left. Sometimes I feel like I'm collecting ghosts, building an entire haunted house inside my head." Clara reached across the table without thinking and placed her hand over his. He looked at their joined hands with something like wonder, as though he'd forgotten what human touch felt like. "I understand," she said. "I really do. My mother, my sister, both gone, and my father might as well be a ghost. He's alive, but he's not really living. He drinks himself to sleep every night and barely acknowledges my existence. I lost my whole family in pieces, and now I'm just this floating thing with no anchor." "Maybe we can be anchors for each other," Theo said, turning his hand over so their palms touched. "Not in a romantic way necessarily, not in any way that requires definition. Just 2 people who understand loss and guilt and the complicated mathematics of trying to keep existing when existing feels impossible." "I'd like that," Clara whispered. They finished eating, their hands still touching across the table, and Clara felt something shift inside her. Not healing, that would take much longer, but maybe the beginning of healing. The acknowledgement that healing was even possible. After dinner, Theo cleared the plates and brought out dessert, a simple lemon tart that he'd apparently made that afternoon. They moved to the living area with their plates, sitting on the white sofa that Clara had cleaned so many times but never actually sat on. From here, the view was even more spectacular, the entire city spread out below them like a universe of tiny lights. "Can I ask you something personal?" Theo said as they ate the tart, which was perfectly tart and sweet at once. "You can ask. I might not answer, but you can ask." The poems you used to write, the ones Isabel loved, what were they about? Clara was quiet for a long moment, surprised by the question. Small things, mostly. The way light fell through windows. The sound of rain on different surfaces. The feeling of being alone in a crowd. I was fascinated by the tiny moments that most people overlooked. I wanted to make people stop and pay attention to the beauty and sadness in ordinary things. Do you still see those things? Theo asked. The small beauties. Sometimes, Clara admitted. I try not to, because noticing beauty feels like betrayal when Isabel can't notice anything anymore. But yes, sometimes I still see them. Yesterday, walking to work, I saw a spider web covered in dewdrops, each drop reflecting a tiny rainbow, and I stopped and looked at it for probably 5 minutes, just watching the way the light changed as the sun moved. It was the most beautiful thing I'd seen in months, and I felt guilty for seeing it, for appreciating it, for being alive to witness it when Isabel wasn't. I don't think that's betrayal, Theo said gently. I think that's exactly what Isabel would want. For you to see beauty and write about it and share it with the world. The dead don't want us to die with them, Clara. They want us to live for them, to experience all the things they can't experience anymore. Clara felt tears sliding down her cheeks. How do you know that? How can you be sure? Because when I think about Eloise, when I really think about her and not just my guilt, I know she'd be furious that I've spent 3 years hiding in this penthouse. She'd tell me I was being melodramatic and self-indulgent. She'd say that if I really wanted to honor her memory, I should go out and actually do something good, with the absurd amount of wealth and privilege I have. And she'd be right. So I'm trying to honor her by destroying the thing that made me wealthy but morally compromised. It's not enough, it will never be enough, but it's something. They sat in silence, both crying quietly, not bothering to hide it or apologize for it. This was what they both needed, Clara realized. Not romance or sex or even friendship necessarily. Just witness. Someone to sit with them in their grief and not try to fix it, or minimize it, or rush them through it. After a while, Theo stood and held out his hand. Come with me. I want to show you something. Clara took his hand and let him lead her to the study. The room was exactly as she remembered. Papers everywhere. Multiple computer screens glowing with code and data visualizations. The desk chair with its blanket, suggesting many nights spent working rather than sleeping. But Theo didn't lead her to the computers. Instead, he went to a bookshelf she hadn't noticed before, tucked in the corner, and pulled out a worn leather journal. This was Eloise's, he said, handling it carefully. Her diary from the last year of her life. I found it in her flat after she died, and I've read it probably 100 times. I keep it here because it reminds me of who she was, not just the sister I lost, but the actual person. Her dreams, her fears, her sense of humor. I want to read you something, if that's okay. Clara nodded, and they sat together on the floor of the study, backs against the wall, the journal between them. Theo opened it to a page marked with a faded ribbon and began to read in a soft voice. Theo called today, cancelled our dinner plans again because of some meeting that apparently couldn't wait. I wanted to be angry, but I just felt sad. He's disappearing into his work, becoming this cold, mechanical version of himself. I remember when he used to laugh, really laugh, the kind of laugh that made his whole face light up. I haven't seen that laugh in over a year. I'm worried about him. I'm worried that he's building this empire, but losing himself in the process. I want to tell him that none of it matters, the money and the success and the accolades, if he's not actually happy. But he wouldn't listen. He's convinced that achievement equals fulfillment. I wish I could make him understand that fulfillment comes from connection, from love, from actually being present in your own life. But I don't think he'd hear me. He's too far gone. Theo's voice broke on the last words, and he closed the journal carefully. She wrote that 3 weeks before she died. 3 weeks, and I was still cancelling dinners and missing her calls and prioritizing work over everything else. And then she was gone, and I never got the chance to hear her, really hear her about what mattered. She loved you, Clara said softly. That's so clear in what she wrote. She was worried about you, yes, but that worry came from love. She wanted you to be happy. I know, Theo said. That makes it worse somehow. She loved me despite my flaws, despite my obsession with work, despite my inability to be emotionally present, and I couldn't even give her 1 day. 1 single day of my time. That's what I can't forgive myself for. Clara took the journal from his hands and held it carefully. Can I tell you something about Isabel? Something I've never told anyone? Please. The night she died, we had a fight. A stupid fight about nothing, really. I was stressed about money, about trying to help our father with bills, and she said I was being a martyr again. She said I needed to focus on my own life, my own dreams, instead of constantly sacrificing for everyone else. I got angry and told her she was being selfish, that not everyone could just pursue their dreams without thinking about practical realities. We hung up the phone angry with each other, and those were the last words I said to my sister. I called her selfish. And then she died, and I never got to tell her I was sorry, that I was wrong, that she was right about everything. Theo took Clara's free hand and squeezed it. She knew you loved her, just like Eloise knew I loved her. One fight, one harsh word, one missed dinner. Those things don't erase years of love and connection. We're holding on to these isolated moments of failure and letting them define entire relationships. But that's not fair to them or to us. The love was there. The love is still there. How do we move forward? Clara asked, her voice breaking. How do we actually live with this? I don't know, Theo admitted. But maybe we start by forgiving ourselves for being human, for making mistakes, for not being perfect. Maybe we start by actually living the lives they wanted us to live. You start writing again. I destroy the company that's causing harm and build something better. We honor them by being better, not by punishing ourselves eternally. They sat on the floor of the study for a long time, holding hands, the journal between them, the soft glow of computer screens illuminating their faces. Outside, the city continued its Saturday night routines, people laughing and drinking and living their lives, completely unaware of the two broken people on the 21st floor trying to figure out how to feel human again. Eventually, Theo stood and pulled Clara to her feet. It's getting late. You should probably go home. But Clara, before you do, I need to tell you something. What? I've been watching you, he said, his voice careful. Not just the security footage that flagged you when you first arrived. I've been watching you specifically, intentionally. I have videos, Clara. Hours of footage of you cleaning, working, existing. I've been studying you, trying to understand you, trying to figure out why you affected me so deeply. And I know that's a violation. I know it's wrong. But I need you to know the truth before this goes any further. Clara felt her blood run cold. What do you mean you have videos of me? The security system in this suite, it doesn't just analyze in real time. It stores everything, and I've been keeping the footage of you specifically. I've watched you dozens of times, Clara. Watched you clean the rooms. Watched you pause by the windows. Watched you singing under your breath when you thought no one could hear. I've been obsessed with understanding you, and I crossed lines I shouldn't have crossed. Clara pulled her hand away from his, stumbling backward. You've been surveilling me, recording me without my knowledge or consent. That's not just a violation, Theo, that's illegal. That's predatory. I know, Theo said, his voice raw. I know. And I'm not trying to justify it or minimize it. I'm telling you because I can't build anything real with you if it's based on deception. I needed you to know what I've done, so you can make an informed choice about whether you want to see me again. Why? Clara demanded, anger and hurt warring in her voice. Why would you do that? I thought you saw me as a person, not a subject to be analyzed. You're right, and I did see you as a person. That's exactly why I became obsessed. You weren't just data to me, Clara. You were real in a way nothing else in my life had been real for 3 years. And I handled that terribly. I reverted to what I know, which is observation and analysis. I treated you like a puzzle to solve, instead of a person to connect with. And I'm sorry. I'm so deeply sorry. Clara grabbed her bag and Isabel's cardigan, her hands shaking. I need to leave. I need to think about this. I can't process this right now. I understand. But Clara, please, know that I will delete all the footage tonight, right now. You have my word. Your word doesn't mean much to me right now, Clara said, heading toward the lift. You violated my privacy, my trust, everything. You made me feel seen in a positive way, but really you were just watching me like I was a specimen in a lab. That's not fair, Theo said, following her. It started that way, yes, but it became something else. I was trying to understand you, trying to connect with you in the only way I knew how. I know that doesn't excuse it, but please don't reduce it to mere surveillance. You matter to me, Clara. You matter more than anyone has mattered in 3 years. Clara jabbed the button for the lift, desperate to escape. You don't get to decide that you matter to me. You don't get to violate my privacy and then expect me to be flattered by your obsession. I trusted you. I shared things with you tonight that I haven't shared with anyone. And all the while you knew you'd been watching me, recording me, studying me like I was one of your algorithms. The lift doors opened and Clara stepped inside. Theo made no move to stop her, just stood in the foyer looking devastated. I'm sorry, Clara, I'm so sorry. I should have told you sooner. I should have never started watching in the first place. But please, if you can, try to forgive me, or at least try to understand that I'm broken too. And I handled my attraction to you in the most broken way possible. The lift doors closed on his words, and Clara slumped against the wall, tears streaming down her face. She felt violated, betrayed, stupid for trusting him, for opening up to him, for thinking that someone like Theo Calderon could see her as anything other than an interesting case study. The man who'd built his fortune on surveilling people had surveilled her, and she'd been naive enough to think it meant something beautiful. But underneath the anger and hurt, there was something else. A small voice that whispered that maybe he was telling the truth. Maybe he was broken and had handled his feelings badly. Maybe his confession tonight was an act of courage, not manipulation. Maybe he could have kept the secret, let their relationship develop without her ever knowing, but he'd chosen honesty instead. Clara didn't know what to think. She didn't know what she felt beyond hurt and confused and overwhelmed. The lift descended smoothly, carrying her away from the penthouse and the man who'd seen her but also violated her, and she had no idea if she'd ever go back. When she reached the lobby, Marcus the concierge looked at her with concern. "Miss Clara, are you all right?" "I'm fine," she lied, wiping at her tears. "Just fine." She walked out into the cold October night, the sea air sharp and salty, and let herself cry properly. She'd been seen, truly seen, for the first time in 18 months. But the seeing had come at a cost, and she didn't know if she could pay it. That night, in her bedsit, Clara opened her laptop, an ancient thing she rarely used anymore. She searched for Theo Calderon, for Calderon Systems, for articles about emotional surveillance and privacy violations. She read for hours, learning about the company he'd built, the controversies surrounding it, the ethical debates about consent and observation. She learned that he was even wealthier than she'd imagined, that his technology was used in 20 countries, that he was considered a genius by some and a monster by others. And she learned that 3 months ago, he'd officially resigned from his position as CEO, citing ethical concerns. There were think pieces speculating about what had happened, about internal conflicts and moral dilemmas. Theo had been telling the truth about that, at least. He'd left his company. He was trying to destroy it. He was trying to make amends. But did that excuse what he'd done to her? Did his guilt about his company absolve him of violating her privacy? Clara didn't know. She didn't know anything, except that she was exhausted and hurt, and still, despite everything, she couldn't stop thinking about him, about the way he'd held her hand, about the way he'd cried when reading Eloise's diary, about the way he'd cooked for her and created beauty and light in that cold penthouse, about the way he'd chosen to tell her the truth, even though it cost him everything. She opened the burgundy notebook and began to write. Not about beauty or small moments or rainbows in spiderwebs, but about betrayal and trust and the complicated mathematics of forgiveness. She wrote until her hand ached, and the sky began to lighten with dawn, and when she finally stopped, she still didn't have answers. But she had questions, and questions were at least something. Questions meant she wasn't done thinking about this, wasn't ready to walk away completely. And that terrified her almost as much as the videos themselves. Clara didn't go to work on Sunday. She called in sick again, and this time Maggie's irritation was palpable through the phone line, threats of disciplinary action barely veiled beneath professional courtesy. Clara didn't care. She couldn't face the hotel, couldn't risk running into Theo, couldn't trust herself not to either scream at him or collapse into his arms, and she didn't know which option terrified her more. She spent the day in her bedsit, alternating between fury and confusion, and a terrible longing that made her feel weak and stupid. Her phone buzzed repeatedly with messages from an unknown number that she knew was Theo, but she couldn't bring herself to read them. Each buzz felt like an accusation, a reminder of her own naivety. How could she have trusted him so quickly? How could she have opened herself up to someone who'd been watching her like a laboratory specimen? By Monday morning, Clara had made a decision. She would go back to work, but she would request a permanent transfer away from any floors Theo might occupy. She would avoid him completely, rebuild her walls, return to the safe numbness that had carried her through the past 18 months. The brief awakening she'd experienced, the tiny bird with feathers that had started singing in her chest, she would smother it back into silence. It was safer that way, safer to feel nothing than to risk being hurt again. But when she arrived at the Sovereign that Monday at her usual time, 6 in the morning, Maggie was waiting for her in the staff room with an expression Clara couldn't read. "Clara, we need to talk." "In my office now." Clara's stomach dropped. She followed Maggie through the corridors to the small, cluttered office near the laundry room, her mind racing through possibilities. Had Theo complained about her? Had he told management about their dinner? Was she about to be fired? Maggie closed the door and gestured for Clara to sit. "I received a very unusual call this weekend. From Mr. Calderon." Clara's blood ran cold. "I can explain." "He's checking out," Maggie interrupted. "Today, after 8 months, he's leaving. And he specifically requested that his final bill be processed by accounting with a substantial bonus to be distributed among the housekeeping staff. £50,000, Clara, to be split between everyone in the department." Clara stared at her, unable to process this information. "Why?" He didn't say. He just said he'd concluded his business in Brighton and would be leaving by noon. "He also asked me to give you this." Maggie pulled an envelope from her desk drawer, thick and cream-colored, Clara's name written on it in that careful, precise handwriting. "I don't know what's going on between you two, and frankly, I don't want to know. But Clara, if a guest is giving you personal letters, that's a boundary issue we need to address." "Nothing happened," Clara said quickly. "Nothing inappropriate. I promise." Maggie studied her for a long moment. "I want to believe you." "You've been a good worker, Clara, despite your recent absences. But I'm concerned. Mr. Calderon is a very wealthy, very influential man. If something inappropriate occurred—" "It didn't," Clara said firmly. "He was kind to me, that's all. He saw that I was struggling and he was kind. And I'm sorry if that crossed professional lines, but nothing physical or sexual happened. So I swear." Maggie sighed. "All right, I believe you. But Clara, you need to be more careful. People like Mr. Calderon, they don't live in the same world as us. Whatever kindness he showed you, it comes from a place of enormous privilege. Don't mistake that for genuine connection." Clara nodded, though Maggie's words stung. Because what if she was right? What if Theo's interest in her was just the boredom of a wealthy man playing with someone he perceived as beneath him? What if the confession about the videos, the vulnerability, the tears over his sister's diary, what if all of it was just manipulation? She took the envelope and left Maggie's office, her hands shaking. She didn't open it immediately. Instead, she went through her morning routine mechanically, cleaning rooms on the 7th floor, trying not to think about Theo packing his things 14 floors above her, preparing to leave Brighton and disappear from her life as suddenly as he'd entered it. At 11 o'clock, during her break, Clara finally opened the envelope. Inside was a letter several pages long and a USB drive. She read the letter first, sitting in the staff break room with a cup of terrible coffee going cold in her hands. "Clara, I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't expect you to understand or to give me another chance. But I need you to know the truth, all of it, before I leave. The videos I mentioned, I deleted them all. Every single file. I've included proof on this USB drive. Timestamps, deletion logs, everything. They're gone and no copies exist anywhere. I wanted you to have evidence, not just my word, because my word has proven unreliable. I also wanted to explain why I kept them in the first place, not as justification but as context. When you first walked into the penthouse, my surveillance system flagged you as I told you. But it was more than that. The algorithm identified patterns in your movement and behavior that were identical to patterns I'd been displaying for months. Depression markers, trauma indicators, signs of someone systematically erasing themselves from existence. And seeing that data about you felt like looking into a mirror for the first time in 3 years. I became obsessed with understanding you because I thought if I could understand you, maybe I could understand myself. Maybe I could find a way out of the prison I'd built. So I watched you. I studied you. I analyzed every gesture and expression and moment, and gradually something shifted. You stopped being data and became a person. A real, complex, beautiful person who made me feel things I'd thought were dead inside me. I should have stopped watching then. I should have deleted everything and approached you honestly, but I was terrified of losing access to you, terrified that if I couldn't observe you, I'd lose the connection I felt. So I kept watching, and I kept rationalizing it as research, as trying to understand when really it was just cowardice and obsession. When I finally met you properly, when we spoke face to face, I realized the videos were worthless. They showed me your surface but revealed nothing about your depth. The Clara in the videos was incomplete, a partial picture. The real Clara, the woman who writes poetry and carries impossible guilt and sees rainbows in spiderwebs, she was so much more than any algorithm could capture, and I fell in love with her. Not the surveillance subject, but the actual person. I fell in love with you, Clara. And I have no right to say that, no right to burden you with feelings you didn't ask for, but I need you to know, because I'm leaving Brighton today, and I'm going to finish what I started. I'm going to destroy Calderon Systems. I'm going to release all the documentation about the unethical contracts and the human rights abuses. I'm going to sacrifice everything I've built to stop the harm my technology has caused. And I'm doing it partly because it's the right thing to do, but also because of you. Because you made me want to be someone worthy of being seen by you, someone who values human dignity over profit and control. You did that, Clara. You woke me up. And even if you never speak to me again, even if you hate me forever, I'll be grateful for that awakening. The USB drive contains the deletion logs, but also something else. All the poems I've written since meeting you. Dozens of them. Written in the middle of the night when I couldn't sleep, when I was thinking about you and trying to understand what you meant to me. You don't have to read them. You can throw this whole letter away if you want, but I wanted you to have them, to know that you inspired something beautiful in someone who thought he'd lost the capacity for beauty. Thank you, Clara. Thank you for seeing me. Thank you for sharing your grief with me. Thank you for being brave enough to show up to dinner, even though you were terrified. Thank you for existing in the world and reminding me that existence can mean something. I love you. I'm sorry. I hope someday you can forgive me. Theo. Clara read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down her face, completely unable to process the magnitude of what he was saying. He loved her. He was leaving. He was going to destroy his entire empire, and part of his motivation was her. It was too much, too overwhelming, too impossible to believe. She looked at the USB drive, then at the clock. It was 11:30. Theo had said he was leaving by noon. She had 30 minutes to decide whether to let him go or to do something incredibly stupid and brave. Isabel's voice echoed in her head. Stop being so fucking careful all the time. Clara, take a chance, live. Clara grabbed her bag and ran. She didn't clock out, didn't tell anyone where she was going. She just ran through the corridors to the main lobby, to the private lift that led to the penthouse. She used her keycard, the one she still had from her cleaning duties, and jabbed the button frantically as the doors closed. The lift ascended with agonizing slowness. Clara's heart hammered so hard she thought she might be sick. She didn't know what she was going to say. She didn't know if she was running toward forgiveness, or just toward an explanation, toward closure, or toward something more. She just knew she couldn't let him leave without seeing him one more time. The doors opened into the penthouse foyer, and Clara's breath caught. The space was empty. The furniture was still there, but all signs of Theo's habitation were gone. No papers in the study, no books on the nightstand visible through the bedroom door, no laptop, no coffee mugs, nothing. He'd already left. No, Clara whispered, stepping into the empty space. No, please, Clara. She spun around. Theo stood in the doorway to the terrace, wearing a black coat and carrying a leather bag, clearly on his way out. He stared at her with an expression of complete shock. You came, he said, his voice hoarse. I didn't think, I never imagined. You're leaving, Clara said, the words tumbling out. You're leaving and you were just going to go without... You told me to leave you alone, Theo interrupted gently. You were hurt and angry, and you had every right to be. I thought the kindest thing I could do was respect your wishes and disappear from your life. I read your letter, Clara said, and I don't know if I can forgive you for the videos. I don't know if I can trust you. But I also don't know if I can let you leave without telling you that you woke me up too. That dinner with you, sharing our grief, feeling seen for the first time in 18 months, it changed something in me. That I'm terrified of that change because change means risk, and risk means the possibility of more loss and more pain. But I think maybe I'm more terrified of going back to sleep, of returning to that half-life where I'm just surviving. So I'm here, and I don't know what I'm asking for, but I couldn't let you go without saying this." Theo set down his bag and crossed to her, stopping just close enough that she could see the shadows under his eyes, the lines of exhaustion and grief etched into his face. "What are you saying, Clara?" "I'm saying I don't know if I can trust you. I'm saying the videos were a violation, and I might never fully get over that. But I'm also saying that I understand why you did it. In a broken, fucked-up way, I understand. Because I've been watching you, too, through the security footage in the corridors, through the window in the staff room that faces the penthouse terrace. I've been trying to understand you just like you were trying to understand me. So maybe we're both broken and invasive and wrong, but maybe that means we understand each other in a way no one else could." "Clara." "I'm not finished," she said, her voice shaking. "I'm saying that I might be falling in love with you too, and that terrifies me more than anything, because loving someone means giving them the power to destroy you, and I don't know if I can survive another destruction. But I also can't survive continuing to not live. So I'm here, and I'm telling you this, and I'm asking if there's any possible way we could try. Not now, not immediately, but someday. After you've done what you need to do with your company. After I've figured out how to exist in the world again. Could we try?" Theo's eyes filled with tears. "Yes, God, yes. Clara, I would wait forever for the chance to try with you. I'll destroy the company. I'll make amends for what I've done. I'll become someone worthy of your trust. However long it takes." Clara took a step closer. "Show me the deletion logs. Show me proof that the videos are gone." Theo immediately pulled out his phone and opened it, navigating to a secure folder. He handed her the phone, and Clara scrolled through screens of technical data she barely understood, but the dates and times were clear. Every video file of her, deleted Saturday night after she'd left. Permanent deletion, no recovery possible. "Okay," she said, handing back the phone. "Okay, I believe you." "Clara, there's something else you need to know," Theo said, his expression darkening. "Something I discovered this morning. It's bad." "What?" "My partners at Calderon Systems. They've been monitoring my activities. I thought I'd been careful, thought I'd covered my tracks, but apparently they've known for weeks that I'm planning to sabotage the company. And they've been watching you, Clara. They know about you, about our connection. Do they see you as leverage?" Clara felt ice flood her veins. "What do you mean, leverage?" "I mean they might try to use you to stop me from releasing the documentation, to blackmail me into staying silent about the unethical contracts. I don't think they'd actually hurt you, but I can't be certain. These are people who've proven they're willing to ignore human rights for profit. I don't know what they're capable of. So what do I do?" Clara asked, fear making her voice sharp. "You come with me," Theo said immediately. "Right now. We leave Brighton, go somewhere they can't find us. I have a cottage in the Lake District, completely off-grid, no digital trail. We go there, I finish the virus and release the documents remotely, and we wait until everything blows over. It's not ideal, I know, but it's the safest option." "I can't just leave," Clara protested. "I have a job, rent to pay, responsibilities." "Clara, please. I know I have no right to ask this of you, but I'm terrified. I'm terrified that my partners will do something to hurt you to get to me. Please, just for a few days, come with me and let me keep you safe. After it's done, after the company is destroyed, you can go back to your life, or you can stay with me. Whatever you choose. But right now I need to know you're safe." Clara looked at him. At this man who'd violated her privacy and confessed his love, and was now asking her to run away with him to the Lake District like they were in some kind of thriller novel. It was absurd. It was melodramatic. It was possibly the worst decision she could make. "Okay," she heard herself say. "Okay, let's go." They left the penthouse together, Theo carrying his single leather bag, Clara with just her handbag and the clothes on her back. They took his car, a sleek black Mercedes that had been parked in the hotel's private garage for 8 months, and drove out of Brighton as the grey sky began releasing the rain it had been threatening all morning. Clara texted Maggie a vague excuse about a family emergency. Knowing she was probably losing her job, but unable to care in the moment, she watched the city disappear in the side mirror, the sea fading to a distant grey line, and felt as though she were leaving behind more than just Brighton. She was leaving behind the half-life she'd constructed, the careful numbness, the slow disappearance. She was choosing something terrifying and unknown, and Isabel would have been so proud. They drove north for hours, barely speaking, the silence comfortable rather than awkward. Theo focused on the road, his hands steady on the wheel, occasionally glancing at her as though to reassure himself she was really there. Clara watched the landscape change from urban sprawl to countryside, to the dramatic fells of the Lake District, grey and green and ancient under the perpetual rain. The cottage was exactly as Theo had described, isolated, surrounded by sheep-dotted hills, with no visible neighbours, and only a rough track leading to the front door. Inside it was small but comfortable, with exposed beams and a wood-burning stove and windows that looked out onto endless wilderness. "This was my father's retreat," Theo explained as they entered, shaking rain from their coats. "He'd come here to write, to escape the demands of Oxford and academic life. After he died, I kept it but rarely used it. Too many memories. But right now, memories feel like exactly what we need." That first evening in the cottage, they moved around each other carefully, like two wounded animals learning to coexist. Theo made dinner, simple pasta with vegetables from the cottage's small garden, while Clara explored the space. She found books everywhere, her own personal paradise, shelves lining every wall with everything from philosophy to poetry to mystery novels. She found herself gravitating toward the poetry section, pulling out a collection of W.H. Auden and reading by the light of the wood stove. They ate dinner in companionable silence. Then Theo set up his laptop at the small dining table and began working on his virus. Clara watched him work, fascinated by the intensity of his focus, the way his fingers flew across the keyboard, the way he muttered to himself in what sounded like French when something didn't work correctly. "My mother's influence," he explained when he noticed her listening. "I curse in French. It's less offensive somehow." "It's beautiful," Clara said. "The language, I mean, and watching you work. You're completely absorbed." "This is the only thing I've ever been good at," Theo said, his eyes on the screen. "Understanding systems, finding vulnerabilities, creating elegant solutions to complex problems. I just wish I'd used these skills for something better from the beginning." "You're using them for something better now," Clara pointed out. "Only because you inspired me to," he said softly, finally looking at her. "This is all because of you, Clara." That night they slept in separate rooms, Theo in the main bedroom and Clara in the small guest room, but Clara couldn't sleep. She lay awake listening to the rain hammer the roof and the wind howl around the cottage, and she thought about the surreal turn her life had taken. 3 days ago, she'd been a hotel maid living in a depressing bedsit, slowly disappearing into grief and guilt. Now she was in a cottage in the Lake District, with a millionaire who loved her, waiting for him to commit corporate sabotage. It was insane. It was impossible. It was the most alive she'd felt since Isabel died. The next 3 days followed a strange but comfortable pattern. Theo worked obsessively on his virus and the documentation he planned to release, barely sleeping. Sustained by endless cups of coffee and occasional meals Clara forced him to eat. Clara read and wrote and explored the surrounding hills when the rain permitted. She filled pages of the burgundy notebook with poems about grief and awakening, and the complicated mathematics of trust. She wrote about Isabel, about her mother, about the weight of guilt and the possibility of forgiveness. She wrote about Theo, about the way he moved through the world with careful precision, about his grey-blue eyes and his careful hands, and the way he looked at her as though she was something precious and breakable. On the third evening, Theo emerged from his work looking exhausted but triumphant. "It's ready. The virus is ready. I'm going to deploy it tonight. Release all the documentation to major news outlets simultaneously. By morning, Calderon systems will be destroyed, and I'll be ruined. Are you sure you want to be here when I do this? Because there's no going back after this point." Clara set down her notebook and crossed to him. "I'm sure. Do it." At midnight, Theo pressed a key on his laptop and the virus deployed. They watched together as code streamed across the screen, infiltrating Calderon Systems' servers, corrupting the core algorithms, destroying years of work in minutes. Simultaneously, encrypted emails went out to journalists at The Guardian, BBC, The Washington Post, The New York Times, all containing detailed documentation of the unethical contracts, the human rights abuses, the governments that had used Calderon Systems technology to disappear dissidents. "It's done," Theo said, his voice hollow. Everything I built, everything I achieved, it's gone. Clara took his hand. No, everything corrupt is gone. But you're still here. You're still brilliant. You can build something better. That night, they stayed up together, watching the news coverage begin, watching as the story exploded across social media and news websites. Calderon systems in chaos. Questions about ethics and surveillance and corporate responsibility. Calls for investigations and regulations. Theo's partners releasing statements denouncing him, calling him a traitor and a saboteur. Investors filing lawsuits. The tech world in an uproar. And through it all, Theo sat calmly, Clara's hand in his, watching his empire burn. But the next morning brought a development neither of them had anticipated. Theo's phone, which he'd kept off for 3 days, buzzed with an urgent message when he finally turned it on to check the full extent of the fallout. The message was from an unknown number, but when he opened it, his face went white. "Clara," he said, his voice shaking. "Look at this." It was a video. Poor quality, clearly from a security camera, and it showed Clara, unconscious and slumped in the back of a van. The timestamp showed it had been recorded yesterday morning. "That's not possible," Clara said, her heart racing. "I'm right here. That can't be me." But then she looked closer and realized with horror that it wasn't her in the video. The woman was similar. Same hair color, same approximate build, but different features. "Who is that?" she whispered. Theo's fingers flew across his keyboard, analyzing the video's metadata, tracking its origins. His face went from white to gray as he worked. "It's Roz," he said finally. "The other maid who sometimes cleaned my suite. They took her thinking she was you. My partners, they grabbed the wrong person." Clara felt sick. "We have to call the police." "We have to—" "We will," Theo said, already reaching for his phone. "But Clara, this changes everything. They were willing to kidnap someone to stop me. The documentation has already been released, but they still have Roz. They'll hurt her because they think she's you. We need to fix this immediately." The next hours were a blur of phone calls and police reports and frantic planning. Theo contacted his partners directly, told them they had the wrong person, offered to turn himself in if they released Roz. Clara insisted on going to the police station with him, refusing to let him face this alone. The truth came out in pieces. Theo's partners, desperate to stop him from destroying the company, had hired a private security firm to retrieve Clara, planning to use her as leverage. But they'd based their identification on old surveillance footage from the hotel and had grabbed Roz instead when she was leaving work one evening. She'd been held in a private facility in Manchester, not harmed but terrified and confused. The police raid that recovered Roz happened less than 24 hours after the initial video. She was found frightened, but physically unharmed. And when she saw Clara at the police station, she actually laughed through her tears. "They kept saying I needed to tell them where Theo Calderon was," Roz said, still shaking. "And I kept saying I had no idea what they were talking about. I just cleaned his room. I didn't know him." "I'm so sorry," Clara said, taking Roz's hand. "This is my fault. They wanted me and got you instead." "Don't be ridiculous," Roz said firmly. "This isn't your fault. It's the fault of rich assholes who think they can do whatever they want. I'm just glad you're okay." Theo's partners were arrested within 48 hours. The scandal grew exponentially, encompassing not just the unethical contracts, but now kidnapping and corporate conspiracy. Calderon systems collapsed completely, share value plummeting to nothing, investor confidence destroyed, criminal investigations opened in multiple countries. And Theo, as he'd predicted, lost everything. His wealth evaporated in lawsuits and settlements. His reputation was destroyed, though some praised him as a whistleblower, while others condemned him as a traitor. His life as he'd known it was over. But in the weeks that followed, as the dust began to settle and the news cycle moved on to other scandals, Clara and Theo remained in the Lake District cottage, not hiding exactly, but healing, learning to exist together, learning to trust, learning to forgive themselves and each other for the ways they'd both been broken. Clara returned to writing seriously, not just in the notebook, but actual submissions to literary magazines. She wrote about grief and guilt and the possibility of redemption. She wrote about surveillance and privacy and what it meant to truly see someone, and slowly, miraculously, editors began accepting her work. Small publications at first, but it was something. It was her words in the world, Isabel's belief in her finally vindicated. Theo, stripped of his wealth and reputation, began building something new. Not a company, but a non-profit organization focused on digital rights and privacy advocacy. Using his insider knowledge of surveillance technology, he became an expert witness in court cases about privacy violations. He gave lectures at universities about ethics in tech. He created free software that helped activists protect themselves from surveillance. He transformed his guilt into action, his knowledge into something that actually helped people rather than harming them. And through it all, Clara and Theo learned to love each other. Not the dramatic, all-consuming love of novels, but something quieter and more sustainable. A love built on understanding and forgiveness, and the shared knowledge of what it meant to carry guilt and grief. They had setbacks, moments when Clara's trust wavered or Theo's guilt overwhelmed him, but they kept choosing each other, kept showing up, kept trying. 6 months after the collapse of Calderon Systems, Clara finished her first book. It was a memoir in verse, poetry woven with prose, telling the story of losing Isabel and finding Theo and learning to exist in the world again. She titled it The Weight of Feathers after Dickinson's poem, and she dedicated it to Isabel's memory. The night she finished it, she and Theo sat on the cottage's small porch, watching the sun set over the fells, the sky painted in shades of gold and rose that seemed impossible after so much grey. "I want you to read it," Clara said, handing him the manuscript. "All of it, including the parts about the videos and the betrayal and how angry I was. Because if we're going to do this, if we're going to actually build a life together, it has to be built on complete honesty. No more secrets." Theo took the manuscript with careful hands. "Are you sure?" "I don't want to—" "I'm sure," Clara interrupted. "Read it, see yourself through my eyes, the good and the bad and everything in between, and then tell me if you still want this, want us." He read it that night, all 200 pages, while Clara pretended to sleep in the room next door but actually lay awake, terrified of his reaction. When dawn came and he still hadn't come to bed, she found him sitting on the porch, the manuscript on his lap, tears streaming down his face. "It's beautiful," he said when he saw her. "Clara, it's the most beautiful thing I've ever read. You took something so painful and made it into art. You honored Isabel and your mother and even me, despite everything I did wrong. You made meaning from suffering. That's what art is supposed to do, and you did it perfectly." "Did you get to the end?" Clara asked. "The epilogue? Not yet. I couldn't read through the tears." "Read it," Clara said softly. "Read the last page." Theo turned to the final page and read aloud, his voice breaking. "I don't know if love can fix broken people. I don't know if forgiveness erases harm. I don't know if we can honor the dead by how we live. But I know this, I am alive. I am writing. I am standing in a cottage in the Lake District with a man who saw me when I thought I was invisible, and I am choosing to be here, choosing to exist, choosing to feel. The guilt hasn't disappeared, the grief hasn't vanished, but alongside them, I've made room for something else, for hope, for possibility, for the tiny bird with feathers that kept singing even in my darkest moments. Isabel would want this for me. She would want me to live boldly and write honestly and love deeply, even when love is terrifying. So I'm doing it. I'm living, and I'm inviting you, whoever you are reading this, to do the same, to let yourself be seen, to let yourself feel, to let yourself exist fully, even when existence is painful, because the alternative is disappearing, and we owe it to the people we've lost to stay visible, to stay alive, to keep singing our tunes without words, refusing to stop, refusing to give up, refusing to let grief win. This is my song. This is my existence. This is me, Clara, alive and writing and seen, and I'm not disappearing anymore. Theo closed the manuscript and looked at Clara with such love and gratitude that she felt her breath catch. "Yes," he said simply. "Yes, I want this. I want us. I want to spend the rest of my life making sure you never disappear, making sure your voice is heard, making sure the world knows what an extraordinary person you are." Clara crossed the porch and sat beside him, taking his hand. "I love you," she said, "not despite the videos or the betrayal or the complicated mess of everything, but because of it, because you saw me at my worst and didn't look away, because you were brave enough to confess your mistakes even when it cost you everything, because you're trying to be better, because you make me want to be better too. I love you too, Theo said, pulling her close. I loved you when you were a ghost in a maid's uniform. I loved you when you were furious and hurt and running away. I love you now here, alive and writing and extraordinary. I will love you in whatever form you take, for as long as you'll let me. They sat together as the sun rose over the Lake District. Two broken people who'd found each other in a hotel that looked like a mausoleum, who'd betrayed and forgiven and hurt and healed, who'd learned that being seen was both terrifying and essential. They weren't fixed, not completely. The grief and guilt would always be there, part of the architecture of who they were, but alongside those heavy things, they'd made room for lightness, for hope, for the possibility that they could honor the dead by how fully they lived. Clara's book was published 8 months later by a small but respected press. It became a quiet success, the kind of book that people recommended to friends going through their own grief, the kind that showed up in book clubs and on bedside tables and in therapists' offices. Clara didn't become famous or wealthy, but she became something better. She became a working writer, someone whose words mattered, someone Isabel would have been proud of. Theo's non-profit grew slowly but steadily. He couldn't undo the harm Calderon systems had caused, but he could work to prevent future harms. He became a voice for privacy rights and ethical technology, using his past mistakes as teaching moments. He would never be wealthy again, but he was doing work that actually mattered, and that was worth more than any fortune. They moved back to Brighton eventually, not to the Sovereign but to a small flat near the seafront, close enough to hear the waves, but far enough from the hotel to avoid awkward encounters. Clara got a job teaching creative writing at the University of Brighton, her old university, and every semester she told her students about Isabel, about grief, about the courage it takes to write honestly about pain. On the anniversary of Isabel's death, 2 years after Clara had first met Theo in the penthouse, they went to Isabel's grave together. Clara brought the burgundy notebook, now filled cover to cover with poems and prose and memories. She read one of her favorite pieces aloud, a poem about Isabel's laugh, and Theo stood beside her, holding her hand, bearing witness. She would have liked you, Clara said afterward as they walked back to their car. Isabel. She would have thought you were weird and intense, but she would have liked you. She would have approved of us. I wish I could have met her, Theo said. In a way you have, Clara said. She's in everything I write. Every word is part of her belief in me. So when you read my work, you're meeting her. They drove home as the grey sky opened into rain, as it so often did in Brighton, and Clara thought about the girl she'd been when she first pushed her cleaning trolley onto the penthouse floor. That girl had been disappearing, fading into nothing, convinced she didn't deserve to exist. But that girl had also been brave enough to accept a stranger's poem, to show up to dinner, to run toward connection instead of away from it. That evening, in their small flat with the sound of rain against the windows and the distant rhythm of the sea, Clara opened a new notebook. Not the burgundy one, which was full and finished and perfect as it was, but a fresh notebook with blank pages waiting to be filled. She uncapped her pen and wrote a single line at the top of the first page. This is the story of how I learned to stay. And then she kept writing because that's what she did now. She wrote, she existed. She stayed visible. The tiny bird with feathers in her chest sang constantly now, its tune without words, a reminder that hope, once awakened, refuses to be silenced. She was alive. She was seen. She was loved. And Isabel, wherever she was finally at peace knowing her sister had stopped disappearing and started living.